These daily obligatory prayers, together with a few other specific ones, such as the healing prayer, the Tablet of Ahmad, have been invested by Baha'u'llah with a special potency and significance, and should therefore be accepted as such and be recited by the believers with unquestioning faith and confidence, that through them they may enter into a much closer communion with God and identify themselves more fully with His laws and precepts.
So our speaker this week is Dr. John Woodall, and he'll be talking about the gift of gratitude, reflections on the Tablet of Ahmad. Dr. Woodall is a psychiatrist, formerly on the faculty of Harvard Medical School. He was the director of the State Department refugee relief effort in the Balkans after the war there. He convened the Task Force for Accountability for War Crimes in the Balkans at Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government and advised the U.S. Senate and the International Criminal Tribunal on war crimes issues stemming from the Balkans War.
Hello, friends. I see so many of my brothers and sisters from around the world. So grateful to see you. So very grateful to have this opportunity to be with you. I have to ask your indulgence right off the bat. Speaking about the Tablet of Ahmad is a formidable task. And to be able to cover even a thimbleful of this ocean in the time we have is quite an impiety. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me. And what my hope is that we can speak about some elements of the tablet that maybe aren't often referred to, so that we might maybe blaze some new territory. There's some wonderful, wonderful resources available to you if you're interested in a deeper study. Rich Gorinsky, some time ago, published this book, Learn Well This Tablet. I think it was in the 90s or so. I knew Rich in the Chicago area years ago. No, it came out in 2000. So this is a wonderful resource. John Colstow also has a wonderful book as well. And he interviewed Mr. Faizi in his during his pilgrimage in 1960 about the Tablet of Ahmad. From that interview with Mr. Faizi then produced a wonderful and profoundly moving discussion about his family, as well as Ahmad's the history of Ahmad and the Tablet of Ahmad, and I highly recommend that. Online, there's a wonderful website called thetabletofahmad.org, and that might be Rich who did that, because the author of the website is so humble he doesn't even mention who he is. But I have a hunch it's Rich, because he mentions Learn Well This Tablet a couple of times on that site. But there are several other references given there for a wonderful study of the tablet. Now, if you could see my couch that I'm sitting on, you'd see half of my Baha'i library is here, because I've referenced pretty much all my library to talk about this issue of the gift of gratitude and the Tablet of Ahmad. It goes without saying that the work of Nadir Saidi is absolutely critical to this discussion. Can you see that? Let's see. I'm trying to. I got that blur thing on. Maybe if I get rid of that blur thing, it'll be better. Maybe that'll show it a little bit better. Yeah, The Gate of the Heart. These works and Logos and Civilization by Nadir Saidi are profound gifts of insight into the writings of the Bab in particular. And he specifically has several sections where he talks about the path of the heart that leads us to God, and references the Tablet of Ahmad repeatedly in that context. I'm looking over at the rest of my books over here. Some of the others, Mr. Taherzadeh, in his Revelation of Baha'u'llah, in the second volume, there is a section specifically on the Tablet of Ahmad as well. So these wonderful, wonderful resources are great gifts to us from very erudite, spiritually deepened Baha'is, and several Baha'is who have personal family history with the history of Ahmad. So why did I call this talk the gift of gratitude? Well, because Baha'u'llah says that's the purpose of the tablet. He tells us if we go to the third to last paragraph of the tablet, Baha'u'llah says, and we all know this, learn well this tablet, O Ahmad, chant it during thy days, and withhold not thyself therefrom. For verily God hath ordained for the one who chants it the reward of 100 martyrs and a service in both worlds. It's hard to comprehend what the bounty of that. He says, these favors have we bestowed upon thee as a bounty on our part and a mercy from our presence. Why? That thou mayest be of those who are grateful. Why would Baha'u'llah want us to be grateful? Why would he bestow so much largesse on us just simply for us to be grateful? Does he need our gratitude? Well, the answer is no. Baha'u'llah doesn't need our gratitude. He doesn't need anything from us. Does God need our gratitude? Can you imagine the creator of the universe, where there are hundreds of millions of galaxies in just one section of our strand of the known universe? Can you imagine the Lord of all creation being helped or hindered by whether or not my heart is grateful? It has no bearing on God. It doesn't reach to his exalted court, as one of the phrases from the writings. So why would we be asked to be grateful? It's a wonderful, wonderful quote of Baha'u'llah in the gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah. And these are excerpts from Baha'u'llah's writings that the Guardian compiled in an effort to help the early believers gain a basic understanding of his writings. The very first selection of gleanings, the very first selection of Baha'u'llah's writings is a beautiful, beautiful set of descriptions of how God is exalted above everything, about he's the creator of all. He's not known of anyone. He has no need of anyone, but he is in this position of exaltation. But then he says, far, far from thy glory be what mortal man can affirm of thee, or attribute unto thee, or the praise with which he can glorify thee. Whatever duty thou hast prescribed, that God has prescribed unto thy servants, of extolling to the utmost thy majesty and glory, is but a token of thy grace unto them, that they may be enabled to ascend unto the station conferred upon their own being, the station of the knowledge of their own selves. Isn't that amazing? That they may be enabled to ascend unto the station conferred upon their own inmost being, the station of the knowledge of their own selves. So our praise of God has nothing to do with God, in a way. I mean, it has nothing to do with a benefit to God. The purpose of praise and the purpose of gratitude, for that matter, the purpose of any extolling of God's qualities has really, it doesn't help him or hurt him. What it does is it brings out from us the hidden gems of our divine creation so that we come to know our inmost selves. Isn't that wonderful? So Baha'u'llah is saying that in the Tablet of Ahmad by chanting this tablet, by coming to know it, we are coming to know something of ourselves and unfolding the divine creation within us. So, and that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit now. Could that mean? Um, in religious traditions, this ability to know oneself is really considered the core element of what we know as the covenant, that it's the unfolding of these divine qualities within us. It's the purpose of all the divine revelations. So by our acts of devotion, by our communal acts of devotion, we're unfolding the divine gift within each of us and between us. So, and in doing that, we help recreate society. We create the environment within which more bounty and more divine blessings can emerge. So, all right. Now, having said that, I wanted to read just a few things in clarification about this idea of the divine presence and what that might mean and how it relates to this tablet. So we have this notion that within us is contained all these divine capacities that God has bestowed upon us, but that they're hidden, right? And that over time and over a process of purification and devotion and service and prayer and meditation, we can uncover these capacities. So then what does the divine presence have to do with this? Well, I wanted to talk to you about 3 forms of revelation that Baha'u'llah talks about. And I hope this isn't becoming a little too obscure. What I wanted to do is not talk about what's usually talked about, like in the books that I mentioned, because it's already been talked about. So I wanted to talk about things that maybe are to me, more at the center of what the spiritual path is about, that the Tablet of Ahmad reflects. So in that context, I'm going to the Book of Certitude, the Kitab-i-Igam, and I'm beginning this conversation with reading for you from page 139 of the Kitab-i-Igam. Now, this is a book in which Baha'u'llah is explaining the divine theophany. He's explaining how God, the nature of our relationship to God and his manifestations, and how the Bab was the fulfillment of the promise of all the former religions, and that Baha'u'llah is the appearance of the divine presence of the supreme Godhead. And what does that mean? So let me read here, if you don't mind. This people have repudiated all these verses that unmistakably testify to the reality of attainment into the divine presence. He's talking about what does it mean in the various religious traditions that there would come a time that people could attain unto the divine presence. What does that mean? Does it mean we'll be like in front of God who's sitting on a chair and that we'll see him and there he'll be, or somehow we'll be lifted up into a heaven somewhere above us that God sits on the throne? What does it mean to be in the divine presence? Baha'u'llah says, no theme hath been more emphatically asserted in the Holy Scriptures than this idea of the attainment unto the divine presence. And he says, notwithstanding, they have deprived themselves of this lofty and most exalted rank, this supreme and glorious station. Some have contended that by attainment unto the divine presence is meant the revelation of God in the day of resurrection. Now, should they assert that the revelation of God signifieth a universal revelation? Now, this is an important concept. It's not one that Baha'is talk about too much, but here it is in the Kitab-i-Igam. Should they assert that the revelation of God signifieth a universal revelation, it is clear and evident that such revelation already existeth in all things. Now, he's going to explain how God reveals himself in such a way to cause all of creation to come into existence. And he's calling that a universal revelation that's constantly being enacted, always has been enacted and always will. And so that's why there has always been a universe and will continue to be, because of this universal revelation. And he said, it is clear and evident that such a revelation already existed in all things. The truth of this we have already established, inasmuch as we have demonstrated that all things are the recipients and revealers of the splendor of that ideal king. I'm going to come back to the king. He is the king. Bob is the king of the messengers. That all things are the recipients and revealers of the splendors, which is, that's another, in English that says splendors, but in the original language it's Baha, of the Baha of that ideal king. That all things are the recipients and revealers of the splendors of the ideal king, and that the signs of the revelation of that sun, the source of all splendor, exist and are manifest in the mirror of beings. Not to be too complicated, but Baha'u'llah is saying all things reflect this revelation of the ideal king, that the true knowledge of any atom of the universe is a knowledge of the ideal king that is the source of this universal revelation that causes everything to come into existence and stay in existence. He says, nay, were man to gaze with the eye of divine and spiritual discernment, he will readily recognize that nothing whatsoever can exist without the revelation of the splendor of God, the ideal king. The splendor of God is Baha'u'llah. That's literally what Baha'u'llah means. Nothing whatsoever can exist without the revelation of the splendor of God, the ideal king. So this is one of three revelations Baha'u'llah talks about. The first is this universal revelation that caused everything to come into existence and to stay in existence. And Baha'u'llah says that that happens because of the revelation of the ideal king, the splendor of God, Baha'u'llah, right? So Baha'u'llah is the appearance of Mirza Hussein Ali, who in 1863 announced the divine springtime in this mortal world. But he's also the eternal one. He's the Ancient of Days who has caused all existence to come to be, and from all eternity to all eternity. So this is one element of the revelation of God, is the universal revelation of God by the ideal king. So when we start the tablet, he is the king. This is all by itself. This is Baha'u'llah talking about the station of the creator of everything, right? That the splendor of God, Baha'u'llah, is the ideal king, and that ideal king created everything. Okay, now then he goes on to say, consider how all created things eloquently testify to the revelation of that inner light within them. Behold how within all things the portals of the Rizwan of God are opened, that seekers may attain the cities of understanding and wisdom and enter the gardens of knowledge and power. Now, I would keep reading in this. He refers several times to this revelation as being manifested by the ideal king. But I point out one often neglected phrase there. He says, nay, were man to gaze with the eye of divine and spiritual discernment, he will readily recognize that nothing whatsoever can exist without the revelation of the splendor of God, the ideal king. But he says it takes spiritual discernment. Spiritual discernment. Abdul Baha tells us repeatedly that we need, or as we progress on the spiritual path, through our prayer, through our efforts at selflessness, through our approach to the trials of our lives with increasing submission to God's will, and trying to manifest his benevolence in the worst of times by being receptive to his guidance, even in the worst of times, that over time, what we are doing is we are manifesting more and more of these divine qualities. Okay, so let's see. I just threw myself off track a little bit. So now, I wanted to bring this up because it brings us to this idea of sincerity. How is it that we are to unfold this sort of discernment. Again, Abdu'l-Baha has said that as we advance in this path of spiritual growth, spiritual susceptibilities begin to emerge in our abilities. We're able to perceive things that in a different way, in a deeper way. We're able to see nuance and subtlety and graces where other people may see threats, or we may be able to see guidance where other people see nothing, or we may be able to perceive loving kindness where other people see nothing, right? So these spiritual susceptibilities, these spiritual perceptions are what Baha'u'llah is referring to, that if we develop the eye of spiritual discernment, right, that this is a capacity we need to cultivate, and that in cultivating it, we're able to see that within all things are the signs of the ideal king, right, the splendor of God as manifested in the ideal king. So our work as Baha'is is not simply to believe in 12 principles, right? That a list of 12 principles does nothing to transform the world. But what transforms the world is our capacity to cleanse our inner life, to be able to perceive the divine unity, to be able to perceive that within all things are the signs of God, right? And that within us, that these signs are within us, right? So as we begin to perceive these things, then we become filled with joy, and we become filled with gratitude, because we feel these seas stirring and moving within us, and we're caught up in our connection with all things. Now, this is the kind of conversation I'd like to hear more in Baha'i meetings, is how we're caught up in the divine presence, how we're caught up in the ecstasy and the bliss of the moving of these spiritual forces within us as we give ourselves more fully to the words of Baha'u'llah. One's reminded of the long healing prayer, which we had the opportunity to talk about a year ago or so. Remember that? And remember in that beautiful, beautiful prayer, how, for instance, in the just the example of the first verse, I call on thee, O exalted one, O faithful one, O glorious one, thou the sufficing, thou the healing, thou the abiding, O thou abiding one. It's that it's as if with each unfolding of an understanding of some of the beauty of these qualities within us and in the world, that stirring is so wonderful that and that sense of divine presence so captivating and energizing and uplifting that we naturally respond back, oh, thou abiding one. So God, we recognize these aspects of God's bounty and grace in ourselves and in the world. And as a result of recognizing them and seeing our connection to them, we respond back, oh, thou abiding one. So this aspect of recognizing God and then calling back to him, recognizing, calling back, recognizing, calling back. It's like a ratcheting that happens in our inner world where we're kind of, well, ratcheting ourselves higher and higher in our understanding and in our spiritual growth. I'd ask you to pay attention to that in the writings, how there's this varying aspects of our approach to God and into reality. And it shows up, for instance, in the tablet of Ahmad, in the various ways that Baha'u'llah presents the tablet. Sometimes he's speaking as the manifestation to Ahmad. At other times, he's as the manifestation to all mankind. And sometimes he's not speaking as Baha'u'llah. God is speaking directly through him to Ahmad. So, for instance, we're in the tablet where he says, "O Ahmad." So here's Baha'u'llah speaking to Ahmad. "Bear thou witness that verily he is God. He is God, and there is no God but him, right? The king, right? There's that king again, the creator of all things. Also, it means Baha'u'llah, right? And when he says he, it relates to God, but it also relates to God as we can only know him, which is through Baha'u'llah as well. So here we have Baha'u'llah speaking to Ahmad about God, right? So God is a third person, Ahmad is in second person, and Baha'u'llah is speaking in the first person. Now, in the next paragraph, it says, say. Now, whenever you see that in the writings, it's not Baha'u'llah speaking in the station of the manifest. It's not him speaking as the personage of the manifestation. It's God speaking. So now it says, say, O people, be obedient to the ordinances of God, which have been enjoined in the Bayan by the glorious, the wise one. Verily, he is the king of the messengers, and his book is the mother book. Did you but know? So now we've shifted. Baha'u'llah started by saying, O Ahmad, bear the witness that verily he is God. And now in the next paragraph, it's God saying he, and now the he has shifted. It's God saying that he, the Bab, is the glorious, the wise one. Isn't that interesting? So this kind of change in pronoun, I guess you could say, is Baha'u'llah showing us the various aspects of the eternal king, various aspects of the splendor of God. That sometimes it's Baha'u'llah talking to God, sometimes it's God talking to Baha'u'llah, sometimes it's God talking to humanity directly in that voice of God when he says say, and sometimes it's God talking to humanity through the voice of Baha'u'llah. And you'll see this dynamic throughout the writings of Baha'u'llah, that there are these various aspects of our relationship to the word that stir us, that show us different ways in which we then engage this universal revelation in all things. That so, for instance, again, in the long obligatory prayer, or in the long healing prayer, where we may be bearing witness to God in one way, right? That you are the exalted, you are these things, and then we will come back with another response that, one is a testifying to what he is, but the next is then saying, reaching out to that reality and saying, oh God, here am I, here am I. So I hope I'm making a distinction that the revelation takes us through a process of unfolding these various spiritual susceptibilities, these various gems of divine virtue, by juxtaposing different ways in which we relate to our inner self, to each other, to the Word of God to us, and our relationship back again. And why am I saying all this about the Tablet of Ahmad? Because I think it's important for us to engage these writings in a much more dynamic way and in a much more unfolding way, that we are in relationship to these words, because we are a part of everything, right? We are a part of that infinite creation, and our relationship to these words, the words of the ideal king, unfold these divine capacities within us. So what's the very first thing Baha'u'llah says about how we come into contact with this nearness of God, is the way he describes it. He says that he's proclaiming to the sincere ones the glad tidings of the nearness of God. So I wanted to just talk about that for a little bit, but first I wanted to demonstrate what sincerity is by first a quote from Abdul Baha, and then a little bit about the life of Ahmad. Abdul Baha, in the writings of Abdul Baha, on page 26, he says, let nothing grieve thee, and be thou angered at none. Be thou angered at none. Be thou angered at none. Now that seems like a tall task, doesn't it, in 2024? It behooveth thee to be content with the will of God, and a true friend to all the peoples of the earth, without any exception whatever. This is the quality of the sincere, the way of the saints, the emblem of those who believe in the unity of God, which is the next qualification that Baha'u'llah gives for about who he's proclaiming this message to. So sincerity, notice how the way Abdul Baha describes the station of sincerity has to do with how we relate to the external world, that nothing can anger us, that there's a condition within us that no external event can perturb. Now, at some places in the writings, actually many places in the writings, Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha refer to this condition where the external world doesn't perturb us, where we maintain this sense of the divine presence moving within us and the gratitude that generates. He equates this with protection and says that it's protecting us from feeling overwhelmed by the external world, by the injustice of others, by poverty, by our ill health, by the ridicule or unfairness or betrayal of others, that none of these things hurts our core, but that we are unperturbed. Nothing grieves us, that we are angered at none, right? That this is the quality of the sincere. Now, the interesting thing about the life of Ahmad, he didn't know he was sincere, but his life is absolutely astounding. I really would recommend you go to Taherzade's book, The Revelation of Baha'u'llah, the second volume, or any of the references I mentioned earlier, to read the history of this man who, at a very early age, had this sense of being drawn to the divine. And his deepest yearning, even as a young man, and by young I mean in his teens, he was drawn to the idea that the Mahdi was his coming was imminent, and he wanted nothing more in his life than to come into the presence of God and to be immersed in the beauty of the presence of God. He wasn't looking for 12 principles. He was looking for immolation. He was looking for being consumed in the love of his beloved. Isn't that great? So at 15 years old, he was upsetting his parents because he didn't really want to do anything other than pray and meditate all the time. He's a young man. So at one point in his teens, he gathered up his clothes when he said he was going off to the public bath, and instead he went to India. And he he didn't go right there, but he went to Bashir, a few other places, and wound up in India, where he was looking everywhere for someone who could teach him about the divine presence, someone who could help him understand what the spiritual path and how to free himself from the clutches of ego and the attachment to the material world, so that he would be worthy to be in the divine presence as a young man. So he would do these extreme practices that he was told, that for instance, reciting "There is no God but God" 12,000 times while he was prostrate. And he did this more than once. He did multiple kinds of practices. Anyone who offered him spiritual advice, he would, with all of his heart, practice it in the hopes of coming into contact with the promised one. So it was years later when he's back in Kashan, and the whole story I probably will take up all of our time, but the bottom line is he wound up coming into the presence of the Bab when the Bab was moving from Isfahan to Tehran. Kashan is right between the two. And he was with a gentleman by the name of Mirza Jani, who was a merchant. And he said to the soldiers who were guiding the Bab that, and this man was a Babi. You couldn't say you were a Babi in those days, or you'd risk your life and everyone you knew. So he said that he was a merchant like Ali Muhammad, the Bab, and they had some business to finish. And if it was okay with the guards, he'd like to have him stay in his home for 2 or 3 days. And so Ahmad was invited to that gathering, and he met the Bab under those circumstances. We don't know much about the impact because Ahmad didn't write anything. But what we do know is that he had already become a Babi through the agency of one of the hands of the cause, a man who was to become a hand of the cause, Mullah Sadiq, who became Mullah Azdak, or Baha'u'llah gave him another name. But at any rate, and that was in Mashhad, as opposed to Kashan, where he met the Bab, I'm sorry. But at any rate, this began a time of him teaching the faith as best he could. And he wound up in Baghdad at the time of Baha'u'llah's arrival there. And he spent 6 years. Now, it depends on who you read. Either living in the outer quarters of Baha'u'llah's home or very close to Baha'u'llah's home. So he was coming into a very regular contact with Baha'u'llah. We don't have any written testimony to what that had to be like, but we do know that he was consumed with the presence of Baha'u'llah. Now, in Baha'u'llah's writings, in the Kitab-i-Igan, Baha'u'llah says there really is no proof of the existence of God except for 2. The first proof of God is the presence, the being of the manifestation of God, that every act of theirs, every movement of theirs, everything that happens to them, everything that they enact is a miracle, is by itself a proof of God. And there are, descriptions of Baha'u'llah repeatedly say this, that being in his presence was something that defied description. In fact, people would come into his presence with things they wanted to ask him, or conflicts they wanted him to resolve, or challenges to his authority. But when they came into his presence, their minds went completely blank at the radiance of him. And in fact, there was a well-circulated understanding that no one could even look at Baha'u'llah because his radiance was so great, and that no one could speak in his presence. In fact, the fact that no one could speak in his presence because of his dumbfounding radiance was used as a proof of how some of the Azalis and enemies of the faith would say that they went to Baha'u'llah's presence and challenged him and defeated him in an argument. And the response to that was, well, that's clearly a lie, because no one can speak in Baha'u'llah's presence. How could you have an argument with him and win when everybody knows you can't even speak in his presence? So then the issue became, well, we have to dismiss him because he's putting something in our tea, and he's a sorcerer of some kind, and this is why he's evil. The point being that the presence of Baha'u'llah was in itself one of the 2 proofs of the existence of God. One more little point about the radiance of Baha'u'llah was that, and this is something that Haji Mirza Haidar Ali talked about, that he determined that after years of knowing Baha'u'llah, he was going to finally figure out what Baha'u'llah's Taj looked like, or the Taj with the turban wrapped around it. Because he said every time he came into Baha'u'llah's presence, he couldn't see him because he was so radiant. So he was going to try to look and find and actually just try to at least figure out what his Taj looked like. So they were at the Garden of Rizwan in outside Akka, And the friends were pressed around Baha'u'llah in the house there that Baha'u'llah would receive the friends. And he couldn't see Baha'u'llah's face, but through the heads of everybody reverentially standing in front of Baha'u'llah, he could see the top of Baha'u'llah's head and the Taj. And he said that was the only time he was ever able to see the Taj because of his Baha'u'llah's radiance. And he said it's green. It was green. So can you imagine? So in our experience, we have no idea. This is something reserved for the time of the manifestation, and Baha'u'llah's manifesting this kind of radiance in and of itself. It's a proof only to those who are challenged and blessed to see the manifestation. And the same we know is the true of the Bab. Now, the second proof Baha'u'llah gives is the revelation itself, the act of revelation and subsequent reading of the revelation. That's the other proof of the existence of God. And he said, beside these two, there is no proof. There is no proof. There's no definitive proof of the existence of God. Can you imagine? So now, having said all this, Ahmad demonstrates this sense of sincerity, that he was utterly and completely consumed with the search for his beloved. Right? The word sincere is interesting. It has a Latin root, and it's actually two words put together, cere and sin. Cere means, when a person would be carving a statue out of marble, and there might be a little chink in the statue, maybe a little nick in the shoulder or something. So what they do is they make a paste out of marble dust, like a putty, and they smooth it into the defect and smooth it over, and that's cere. Sin means without. So sincere, sincere in English, means there's no defect. It's with no need for cere, no need to fill any gaps, no need to try to make something whole that isn't whole. So there's this notion of completeness and of wholeheartedness and of being authentically whole in this idea of sincerity. So Ahmad demonstrates that. He's utterly committed to the search for the beloved, and then winds up years later living in Baha'u'llah's own home. So when Baha'u'llah is banished to Constantinople and then Adrianople, Baha'u'llah told Ahmad to stay behind. But after a few years, he couldn't stand it any longer, and he made his way to Constantinople with the intent of going to the remote prison to Adrianople to see Baha'u'llah. But when he arrived in Constantinople, there was this tablet, and it's the tablet we know as the Tablet of Ahmad. And he assumed from the tablet that Baha'u'llah was telling him that more important than coming into Baha'u'llah's physical presence was that he be assured, right, of Baha'u'llah's bounties, that he that he'd not forget Baha'u'llah's bounties, right? And remember my days during thy days, that the divine presence isn't away from him, that it's in him, and that let everybody else know about this, and that Baha'u'llah is the promised one of the Bayan, and that the divine presence is on the earth, breathing, right? Living and breathing. That is something people would give their lives for, not 12 principles. I'm not saying the 12 principles aren't really important, but that's not the religion of Baha'u'llah. These are important cognitive kind of outlines of some important social principles and theologies, but people don't give their lives for those. People give their lives for the divine presence and how consuming it is to their life when they are sincere. So the first thing Baha'u'llah says is that he's proclaiming to the sincere ones the glad tidings of the nearness of God, that Baha'u'llah, that he himself, that the divine presence, the ideal king is present, right? And that the sincere will have been yearning for that anyway, and will be looking for that. And he's proclaiming to them, here am I. Right? Now he's calling the believers in the divine unity to the court of the presence of the generous one, the believers in the divine unity. Now, the reason I was bringing up a little earlier this idea of revelation was to talk about the divine unity. The divine unity is a teaching of the faith. It's a core teaching of the faith. And it's not just an idea of the unity of religions. It is that. But it's this notion that the divinity, the essence of God is unknowable, right? But that the ideal king, the splendor of God, the revelation of God causes the existence of all things. And that within all things is a sign of the ideal king, of the creator of all things, of the splendor of God. So again, consider how all created things eloquently testify to the revelation of that inner light within them. Behold how within all things the portals of the Rizwan of God are opened, that seekers may attain the cities of understanding and wisdom, and enter the gardens of knowledge and power. Okay, now there's another quote over here I wanted to show you. Oh, there's so many. I'd have to read the whole Agan. I think we'll just abbreviate this. Is that the divine unity, to me, is Baha'u'llah encapsulating in one little phrase a tremendously dynamic interplay between the creator, the manifestation, and that inner nature of all of us that reflects the signs of God, the divine virtues, the gems of divinity within each of us, that we uncover those gems. Oh, well, let's back that up a little bit. So that when Baha'u'llah speaks, when Baha'u'llah speaks of God as the all-knowing, for instance, he's referring to how God cannot be unknowing. He must be all-knowing. But that if you want to see that in the world, you see it in how manifest so much knowledge is contained within a drop. For instance, he says that the seas of understanding are contained within a drop, or the suns of knowledge contained within an atom, right? So it's this notion of divine knowledge imbued into you and every atom of the universe. So, and that atom, right, every atom of the universe was created by the universal revelation, Baha'u'llah calls it in the Agan, by the ideal king, by Baha'u'llah, the splendor of God, right? And so there is this, all right, just to abbreviate this part of the Agan, Baha'u'llah says from page 139 to page 142 or so in the Kitab-i-Agan, he describes three forms of revelation in that that explain the divine presence. The first one is when God reveals himself to himself. And Baha'u'llah says that's something that creation can't understand. There's a whole theology behind it, but it's the revelation of God to himself, right? And that breaks down into how God then manifests himself to the manifestation. But that's that's a long story. So that's the first kind of revelation. The second kind of revelation is the one I've been talking about, this universal revelation. It's kind of a step-down process about how God creates creation. So the first is God reveals himself to himself, and then that generates the manifestation. The manifestation then generates everything, and that's the universal revelation, the second form of revelation. Now, one could say that when someone who's not a Baha'i, let's say, or who's meditating and has a spiritual experience of a sense of oneness, my take is they're experiencing the universal revelation, that they're seeing the divinity within everything, which is a spiritual station. But then what is it about Baha'u'llah? What is it about a manifestation, about the physical historic being? And that's a third form of revelation, where that process of the ideal king, about the splendor of God generating all things, and that stirring within us a new creation, right? A divine springtime, that this evolution of spiritual capacity within human nature is then spoken to directly by the historic being of Baha'u'llah, right? And that's the third form of revelation. And recognition of that revelation requires the sincerity, requires the belief in the unity of God, requires the severance and the love, the four conditions, right? So it's not, so when Baha'u'llah talks about the people of Baha sailing in the ark, right, that there's a special station for them. My take on that is it's important for us to let go of Christian interpretations of the Baha'i faith. It's an Islamic even interpretations of the Baha'i faith. It's a new thing, and we need to be thinking more in terms of what Baha'u'llah says this is, and not trying to filter it through Christian lenses or Islamic lenses. That this crimson arc that Baha'is are in is this revelation of the fullness of the ideal king within us, right? And in the world, right? And giving voice to it, right? How it is to be manifested in our lives and in society, right? So the divine unity is a profound concept of this connection between God, every atom of the universe, and every atom of the universe unfolding the signs of God, and that is given voice historically in the being of Baha'u'llah, and so that this connection between God and the manifestation, that the unknowable essence speaks through the manifestation, and that the manifestation is complex. It both creates the Ancient of Days creates all things at all times, and always has and always will. And the Ancient of Days also manifests as a historic being. All of that is the divine unity, right? So there we have it. So why is that important? Because Baha'u'llah says that he's calling the believers in the divine unity to the court of the presence of the generous one. So Baha'u'llah's presence, right, and he's generous, that there's this generosity that he's bestowing upon human nature. And the generosity gets expressed later in the tablet, that if you save the tablet, that you'll have the reward of 100 martyrs in the service in both worlds, just so that you can be grateful for the generosity. So that brings out more of the divinity of God. Now, then the next statement about who is receiving this tablet is he's informing the severed ones of the message which has been revealed by God. There's that word again, the king, the glorious, the peerless. So you see how the king is changing in meaning. It starts with the king as the generator of all things, the ideal king, the splendor of God. And now the king is becoming the voice of Baha'u'llah, the message which hath been revealed by God as Baha'u'llah, the king, the glorious, the peerless, and then guiding the lovers to the seat of sanctity and to this resplendent beauty. Now, to Nadir Saidi, that's the whole point of everything, is that we're being brought, like in the four valleys, through four stages of approach to the heart, the heart, which is the seat of the revelation of God, that through intense burning love, like Ahmad's love, that he gave up everything, and here he is in India, another country, just like Majnun, sifting the dirt, looking for the beloved, right? He's doing everything possible to find the beloved, to find God. And that love transforms him, and he's entered into the presence, the actual presence, the seat of sanctity, of reunion with the beloved. And in Ahmad's life, he lived in Baha'u'llah's home for 6 years. Oh my gosh. So Ahmad is this, which is such a wonderful thing to see. All right, let's see now. Where do we want to go with that? Oh boy, I've been doing this for how long? For about an hour already. So there's a couple other things I wanted to say, and then let's turn it over to some discussion. And you see already the limitations of my presentation and how it just barely touched the surface of it. And what I also wanted to avoid is what's done so well by some of the references I mentioned to you about, like going verse to verse on the various meanings of the different lines of the tablet. But if we could just mention a few things about this tablet and about just some random thoughts about why Baha'u'llah would say that such great gifts were ours just from reciting this tablet. From that first paragraph where Baha'u'llah says he's proclaiming to the sincere ones the glad tidings of the nearness of God, calling the believers in the divine unity to the court of the presence of the generous one, informing the severed ones of the message which hath been revealed by God, guiding the lovers to the seat of sanctity, and to this resplendent beauty. Verily, this is that most great beauty which hath been foretold in the books of God. Verily is the tree of life that bringeth forth the fruits of God, the exalted, the powerful, the great. Now, this idea that verily is the tree of, I skipped the most important line, didn't I? That through whom truth shall be distinguished from error, and the wisdom of every command shall be tested. You know, we tend to think in this culture that if you're suffering, that something's wrong with you, right? That you're not doing something right because you're being punished. Right? Well, to all the lovers of God in this revelation throughout history, because they love the beloved, and because they're consumed with love for him, they are brought into contrast with all the fears of a society based on anything but divine love, right? So their devotion will be reviled, or will be made fun of, or they won't get that job opportunity, or they'll say, or they'll be honest when their work demands them not to be, or they'll be betrayed, and they won't respond with vengeance, but with kindness, and perhaps suffer the consequences of their kindness. So the act of being a lover is in some ways asking for it, right? It's saying, I'm willing to suffer anything for this love, right? And a belief in 12 principles is not going to do it, right? So I think Baha'u'llah is asking us to move past belief in this tablet and to kindle a raging fire of love in our hearts, and that be the thing that nurtures and guides us, and that let that burning love for his radiant beauty be the thing that is the guiding light of our life, that helps us rely upon God and the Lord of our fathers. For the people are wandering in the paths of delusion, bereft of discernment to see God with their own eyes, or to hear his melodies with their own ears. Now, this is very specific to that time, isn't it? You could see Baha'u'llah in that time. You could see him with your own eyes, but now we can hear with our own ears, right? So that is still available to us. And that yearning, if we could only have been in that time, what would it have been like? Well, how might I have responded if I knew that Baha'u'llah was alive and I was living in this country? Would I have gone to Akka? Would I have, I hope I wasn't alive to be put to that test. Here's something about Ahmad, though. In Baghdad, there's a story of a believer who was said to have killed himself, or he was, first they thought that he was murdered by someone, and they went to Baha'u'llah and said, this person has died. And Baha'u'llah said, he wasn't killed, he sacrificed himself. We showed him a glimmer behind 1,000 veils. We removed these thousands of veils to show him an infinitesimal glimmer of our glory. And it was overwhelming to him, so he sacrificed himself. Now, interestingly, Ahmad, Baha'u'llah says in a tablet, and perhaps because of his sincerity, because of his devotion and his severance, and because his belief in the unity of God and the burning love he had, Baha'u'llah said that Ahmad actually saw his inner reality, Baha'u'llah's inner reality, something that caused this other man to kill himself because it was overwhelming. Baha'u'llah said he showed the same thing to Ahmad and even more. And well, what we have is a life of someone who devoted himself so profoundly to Baha'u'llah. So my question to all of us then is, how do we become that? How do we become that? Would we become that? At a time in history when there is a meltdown of every element of the human fabric, through racism, through sexism, through nationalism, ethnocentrism, you name an ism. These things are ripping us apart, and we're worshiping these things instead of the divine presence. What else but this healing remedy can save this planet? Right? So this tablet and this life of Ahmad are really calling to us to raise our game, to pick it up, to be on fire. Now, when Baha'u'llah says, "Forget not my bounties while I am absent," forget not my bounties while I am absent. If we have not tasted of those bounties, if because of being entrapped in this shell of a world, this veneer of a civilization, if we are trying to draw sustenance and recognition and support and validation from this remnant of a civilization, how in the world can we make ourselves available to his bounties? So it really is critical for us to have a storehouse of bounties that we can refer to, that we've experienced from our prayer life, from our meditations, from our joyful service with each other, from all that we've learned from our consultations with our beloved friends, and from the times we've been humbled and proven wrong, but then become bigger and more wiser as a result. We need storehouses of bounties to draw on, so that we can say, when Baha'u'llah says, "Forget not my bounties while I am absent," we know what he's talking about. And simply recounting 12 principles, good, but there's so much more. He says, "Remember my days during thy days, and my distress and banishment in this remote prison." This calls to mind the last repetition in the long healing prayer, where Baha'u'llah says, "O thou who slayest the lovers, O God of grace to the wicked, O God, O thou who slayest the lovers, and the lovers is capital L. So here's Baha'u'llah saying, remember my days during thy days. Here's Baha'u'llah being slain for 40 years. He'd been bastinadoed in Khorasan. He'd been in Mazandaran, I'm sorry. He'd been forced to run in the heat without shoes, and whipped and scourged and spat upon, and rocks thrown at him as he went to the tribunal there. He'd been forced to the Siachal wearing these galling chains, all of his properties stripped from him, his family impoverished and starving, forced in the middle of the worst winter in anyone's record to march from Tehran all the way to Baghdad, losing members of his family along the way, being betrayed repeatedly, being sent into further exile, betrayed, poisoned, scourged. The list of indignities and sufferings across 40 years that the ancient beauty consented to be bound with chains, that mankind could be released from its bondage, and so that the lovers are slain, right? So that God can be gracious to the wicked, and we are all the wicked, all of creation. So it's that we have an example of loving sacrifice, willing, loving sacrifice, that this releases power into the world. Think of a time when you've had a relationship, when someone hurt you, and they really hurt you, and there was every reason you had to be vengeful or resentful or aloof or off-putting, but instead you chose kindness. You chose another way. And how that transformed that relationship. The easiest way to remember that is with a kid, one of our kids, who says some really mean thing, right? Or some really, if anyone else said it, you might have really hurt. But instead you respond with loving kindness. How that releases into the family a new potential for being, a new way of being, a new sense of unity and hope, right? We need to be these things. And Baha'u'llah is saying, remember my days during thy days and my distress and banishment in this remote prison, and be so steadfast in my love that thy heart shall not waver, even if the swords of the enemy's rain blows upon thee, and all the heavens and the earth arise against thee. If you're in that centered spot of love, it's not like a hanging on like this, oh, I've got to be staunch in my belief. Sometimes it's that. But I look at it more of a centered love, a centered presence of love that nothing can batter, right? So it's not a tremendous gripping, holding on. It's more of in an incandescent, loving presence, right? And then Baha'u'llah says, be thou as a flame of fire to my enemies, right? He actually uses that phrase, a flame of fire. I used to think that this meant, stand up and like defend the faith, and it doesn't mean that. There's several references Baha'u'llah gives to being a flame of fire. And in one context, being a flame of fire is being meek and submissive. That's what a flame of fire means, being submissive. And the other is being a flame of the fire of love. Isn't that interesting? So it's not getting in the face of someone who's challenging you. It's being meek and a flame of love, that this fire, let them then deny that love, right? But you're going to pour it anyway, right? And you're going to abide in it, right? No matter what anybody says. And then a river of life eternal to my loved ones, and then just generous, uninhibited, flowing love to others. Interesting contrast of fire and water, isn't it? Friends, if we can help each other in this path of incandescent love for the presence of the beloved, we can change things, not out of our own doing, but Baha'u'llah can then work with us to inflame others. and to give hope to a world that is darker by the moment. A mere espousal of principles or gatherings without that love are good, but they're not incandescent, right? Baha'u'llah is asking us to be on fire, like Ahmad was on fire. I love you all.
Thank you so much. I really love that in-depth breakdown of such an important tablet. We have a few minutes for some questions, so I'll see if anyone has any questions. You can put it in the chat.
Meaning of the mother book. So the mother book has several meanings. The first chapter, the first surah of the Quran is referred to by Muslims as the mother book. And and then there's a tradition in Shia Islam in particular that of the first chapter of the Quran contains the whole Quran, and of the first surah of the Quran, the whole meaning of that surah of the mother book is contained in the first verse of the Quran, the 19 letters, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. So, and that the entire meaning of those 19 letters, that first verse, is contained in the first word, Bismillah, and all the meaning of the Quran and the first surah and the first verse and the first word is contained in the first letter, which is B. And the entire meaning of the B is contained in the dot, the point underneath it, the primal point. So this is a reference to the Bab, that the Bab contains within him this infinity. So the mother book is a reference to that point of revelation that all things are generated from, that all revelations are generated from this primal point, from this place of revelation, and that the mother book then is this source of revelation, that all revelations proceed from it. So all the holy books have come from this primal point, and this mother book.
Thank you. Someone said, could you list the names of the books you introduced at the beginning?
Holy cow. And these aren't all of them. So Nader Saidi is one of the greatest gifts to the Baha'i world right now. He is a profound scholar who has studied in depth the writings of the Bab at the World Center and helped catalog them, and has written at least two extremely important books to help us understand the writings of the Bab. One of them is called The Gate of the Heart by Nader Saidi. And another is called Logos and Civilization, again by Nader Saidi. Wow, very important books. Now for the Tablet of Ahmad in particular, and I don't have all the I don't have the physical texts of all the books I used for this, and I don't have all of them on my couch right now. But Richard Gorinsky, let's see, where's Rich? There he is. He put this out 23, 40 years ago, Learn Well This Tablet. And it's a real comprehensive verse by verse explication of his understanding of the tablet. Again, we're all just trying to understand this tablet the best we can and finding resources to bring understanding to the text. The reality is that, Mr. Nakjavani used to say he had to be careful because his wife, Violette, would say to him, now, Ali, don't put on your mullah's cap, because he would explain things and as he understood them, and it's not our role to give authoritative explanations of things or to pretend to give authoritative explanations. That's for the central figures. That's for the center of the covenant and the guardian to do. We're free to explore our individual meanings and share them with each other, understanding that these are personal strivings and personal understandings. Now, if you haven't had a chance to read The Revelation of Baha'u'llah, the 4-part series by Mr. Tahirzadeh, I highly recommend them. I think they're still in print, but the second volume of this is of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad. This contains the Tablet of Ahmad. Just one second, did I get that right? No, this is Adrianople. So there's that. I use the Kitab-i Igan. I've got my Qurans up here. Leanings. Those were the basic texts. Oh, and a very helpful online source, and I think Rich Gorinsky did this. It's the tabletofahmad.org. It's very helpful. And John Kolstoe, Kolstoe. John was a saint, and he pioneered in Alaska for a long time. And he asked Mr. Faizi in his 1960 pilgrimage, I think I mentioned, about the Tablet of Ahmad, from which Mr. Faizi has written a beautiful exposition about Ahmad's life. And that exposition of Mr. Faizi is on that website, the Tablet of Ahmad, tabletofahmad.org. But John's book, I don't have John's book.
Thank you. And someone's asking, like, do you do any online classes that people can participate in?
I laugh because I'm trying to find time to. I would love to. With this next chapter of my life, maybe that's something we could do, as long as it's understood that it's a conversation, right? Because I don't pretend to know anything. But one thing I do like is that, and I'm so grateful to the Parhami family, is that I was able to give a discussion about some elements of the long healing prayer. And one of the things I wanted to do more of today was show how connected the long healing prayer is to the Tablet of Ahmad, and how this principle of divine unity is expressed in a very different way in the Tablet of Ahmad and in the long healing prayer. And then the third is the long obligatory prayer, how these 3 tablets are very tightly related to each other. And so that would be interesting to have kind of maybe a discussion about now the long obligatory prayer and how these 3 are kind of a symphony with each other. And of course, all the revelation is connected to all the rest of the revelation. But we know that these 3, Shoghi Effendi told us, have specific power and specific relevance.
Thank you. Yeah, for those who haven't watched, you can go on our channel, and Dr. Woodall has given talks on different topics. You can watch if you haven't already. It looks like that's all the time we have. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for all your questions and for coming today. Our speaker next week will be Soveda Mani, and her topic is, why is humanity hurtling towards disaster, and what will the ultimate outcome be?
Yeah.
So again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern time, and I put the link to our YouTube channel and our mailing list in the chat. Thank you, everyone. See you next week. Bye.